Okay, why?
It just, I don't know.
Just hang on.
It was
Give it to me,
weird.
give it to me,
Got
give it to me.
nothing.
This is Karen and Lynn on Conservative Chic Chat on WSMN 1590, Nashua source for news and talk. And,
You're good, you're on here.
okay, we're good. We've got everything going. We're still working on getting our studio logistics all taken care of here, and it's been absolutely exciting to be in this new studio, and lots of things are happening left and right. So
Yep.
we just keep on going and going.
I'm super excited because I get to see the weather.
And she, you know, the other thing she gets to do is she gets to watch as EMT.
Yeah, I get to see AMR go by and
all of these different.
all my peeps.
all her peeps.
Oh, my
from-
peeps.
All the inner-sea gangs, warfare going on right below us and that type of
Hopefully
thing?
not.
Not so much in Nashua?
We're actually hoping that those
Things don't happen.
things don't happen, exactly.
Yeah, but it's really exciting because we're right here at the intersection, and we get to see, you know, all our responders, and we get to see everybody stop, and we get to say, hey guys, and be safe.
Yeah.
So that's my
exactly.
favorite part of it all. Not
Yeah.
that they have to go rescue anybody, but it still is exciting.
It's
still
nice
in my
to
blood.
know it's still in your
you know.
blood, and she knows that they're going to danger.
Yes.
So there we go. So in studio today we have with us Hal Shurtleff. We're so glad to have you
I'm
back
so glad to
again.
be back.
Welcome.
Yeah.
Remember to eat the mic. You know, one
Fair
of those
enough.
things in radio land is that you have to learn that you
That
gotta
you
get
gotta get-
close to the mic, because otherwise
right.
if we get too far away and we don't hear you. And we
There-
really want to hear what you have to say.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So it's legislation time again, and once again, we
That's
have
right.
somebody applying for an Article 5 constitutional convention, because they think that even though the law says one thing, that if they put it in the Constitution, that those policymakers will now abide by the Constitution when they won't abide by the law.
Well, that's a little background on what an Article 5 for, you know, some of the
That
listeners
is
who may
a
not be
very
familiar
important
with it.
thing to do. I had to throw in my little editorial comment first, though, but I appreciate, Hal's gonna be here because he's gonna keep me on track to make sure that you understand what it is that an Article 5 convention is.
Well, under the U.S. Constitution, there are two ways to amend that Constitution. And our founders made it very difficult for a very good reason, because if they made it easy to do, there'd be hundreds of amendments, and we probably would have lost this great Constitution many years ago.
It's probably 1,000 pages at this point.
Probably, yes, right, like a typical bill coming out of Congress.
Or it looked like the IRS.
IRS tax code,
Yeah,
that's
7
right.
feet tall. Yeah.
So under Article 5, the two ways to amend the Constitution. The first way, the only way that's ever been used, is where the House and Senate, U.S. House and Senate, 2/3 will pass an amendment, and then it needs 2/3, which is, I like that fraction. That's a very
Yes.
good fraction, because 2/3 is hard to do,
Right.
for a reason.
Yeah.
And then it goes to the states. Now there are two ways that it can be ratified by the states, either state legislators or state ratifying conventions, and you need 3/4 of the states to agree to an
I was
amendment.
going to say the other favorite number I have is 3/4.
3/4, yes, and that's even more difficult. So it has to be a really good idea. Although we've had some, in my opinion, at least two very bad amendments that passed. The 16th Amendment, which is income tax, and the 17th Amendment, which was a direct election of U.S. senators, which was an incredible power shift from state legislators who used to appoint senators. So senators served as basically ambassadors, you know, in so many words, from the states, and they were answerable to the legislature, and that changed. But anyway, so those are two bad amendments, in my opinion, that were passed by 3/4 or more of the
Okay,
states.
hang on 1 sec. For people like me and others, I always ask the question and they say, Lynn, ask it for me. So I will. So on that 17th Amendment, when you said about the U.S. senators, explain that just a little more in basic terms for me.
Prior to the 17th Amendment being passed and enacted, U.S. senators were actually elected by state legislatures
Okay.
for a 6-year term, which is still the case.
Right.
So those U.S.
Were they-
senators,
excuse me, were they also paid by the states?
they were paid by the federal government.
Oh, they were
Yeah.
still paid by the
Yes.
federal government. So
But-
when the 17th Amendment came by, it just changed who was electing them.
And it was a dynamic too, because before the 16th Amendment, states the taxes basically was apportioned. So let's just say, for the sake of simple math, that the bill was $100, okay, for the
Right.
to run the country.
Right.
New Hampshire would pay its share of with your four delegates, so you'd pay 4% of the bill, and the senators would say, okay, Gov, now we got to raise the money. Well, that changed. You see, and if you're a legislator, to say, hey, Senator so and so just voted for all these bad tax bills, and he wants to be reelected for them, we're not going to send him back for another 6 years. So there was accountability there. The state legislatures had a real say, and that was, state legislators take an oath to defend the Constitution as well. The idea
Right.
that it's supposed to be all this separation and all, that's not the case. So that changed with the direct election. So yes, they're accountable to the voters of that state, but it's every 6 years. And unfortunately, voters have a very short memory. So you pass a tax bill, and 2 or 3 years later, hey, that guy kissed my baby, showed up at the baseball game, and he's a great guy or she's a great gal. So that was an enormous power transfer. So the other way to amend the Constitution, which was never used in the history of our Constitution since 1787, or it became 1788, 79, was for 2/3 of the states to apply for a convention, what they call an Article 5 convention. The term Constitutional Convention has been used for years. The people, or the group called Convention of States, had a marketing strategy. Oh no, it's not a Constitutional Convention. But if you look at Black's Law Dictionary, and basically you're amending the U.S. Constitution. You're convening to deal with the Constitution. So I don't know what else we'd call it. It's not a stamp collector convention. We're amending we're going to at least propose amendments. Under Article 5, the wording is very clear, and I do have a copy in my briefcase, but it says that this convention would be placed to propose amendments, plural. It doesn't say specific issues or specific topics. So you can't have a convention for one reason, for, say, a balanced budget amendment, or for a term limits amendment, or for a prayer in school amendment. Even if the states have applications that say this is why we want this convention. The state legislators have two duties. One is that they apply, not call, but apply. The second duty, and they may or may not have this, is to actually vote on any proposed amendments that come out of this convention. But if Congress says, no, you know what, we're not too keen on this, so we're going to actually have ratifying conventions. And they did this, to my knowledge, they did it once at when the 21st Amendment was passed. And 21st Amendment repealed prohibition, repealed the 18th Amendment. And there were a number of dry states. There were probably more dry states, enough to stop it.
Right.
And they said, let's have ratifying conventions. So it was a little more easy to control whatever, a dozen people, 24 people, and it was the whole legislature.
Exactly. So we're talking with Hal Shurtleff of campconstitution.com, and Hal is...
.net.
.net. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
campconstitution.net. We don't want to get that wrong. On Conservative Chic Chat on WSMN 1590, Nashua source for news and talk. If you have a question for Hal, please call us at 603-816-1590. 603-816-1590. So the fact that the information out in the general public right now that you can just call this Constitution for specific amendments is misinformation.
It's misinformation, yes.
Right. Because once I go back to the history of when the founding fathers and their representatives were now going to Philadelphia to the Articles of Confederation Convention, where they were going to make suggestions and amendments and so forth for that. I go back to that history, and what happened there was that the delegates who were going to that convention were supposed to specifically talk about revising the articles. That's all they were supposed to do.
To meet the exigencies of, I think that's the term they used. There were 9 resolutions that were passed by states. All of them that said basically you're here to revise that. But James Madison explained what happened. He said that we couldn't actually revise it without doing it justice. They had to rewrite it. But he said the state legislators said that we must do it this way, but we have higher authority, the people. And that's how it was justified, and I believe it's true that this is a sovereign body. They might be chosen by state legislators that may be voted in, but once they sit, basically it's a format. Even one of the top Article 5 supporters, attorneys, I think it's Robert Nadelson, he even admits that they can have rules, they can have guidelines, they can shake hands, but once they sit down at this convention, they can rewrite the rule book. Actually, by the way, there isn't a rule book right now. There are no laws guiding an Article 5. Congress has tried to do that. So Congress believes that under the Necessary and Proper Clause, which is Article 1, Section 8, I think it's the last clause of that they can make the rules of a convention. They believe that's their duty. And so it's interesting, too, that a lot of the folks, and by the way, there are a lot of good people that support an Article 5 convention. I kind of lock horns with them, and it's a little frustrating, and sometimes they jump ship, and sometimes they don't. When I testified just a few days ago, I mean, there were some, Eric Eastman is a wonderful guy. He used to be a state rep here, a Ron Paul Republican, who's been, and I tell you, if there were people like Eric at this convention, if you could say that everyone at this convention will have the mindset of this fellow, I don't think I'd be too concerned about it, but that's not going to happen.
Right. Well, so just not to get too far off the history, so the delegates went to this convention specifically for the purpose of amending, revising the Articles of Confederation. And when they got there, once they decided and found that there was a problem, they decided that they couldn't deal with the articles any longer, and so they completely shelved them and started rewriting and came up with the Constitution of the United States. So my thing is that yes, that exact same scenario could repeat itself should we have an Article 5 convention. And the other thing that happens is that those people who were delegates at that time had a common thread in that they were a moral people. They had the belief in a supreme being, their creator. They didn't have the diversity that we have today. So we don't know who's going to go and represent that, and we can't count on them to have that same moral code that would be governing their decisions. So that, to me, is extremely terrifying.
Cleon Skousen, the late Cleon Skousen, a constitutional scholar of the highest order, he probably taught millions of Americans. Well, he was initially in favor of one. And in a letter he wrote to Phyllis Schlafly, I think it was in the early to mid-'80s, he changed his mind because of that moral factor. He still said, yeah, it's a vehicle that's in the Constitution, but the moral climate, he said, is not good anymore. And I don't think we've improved a whole lot since early 90s, late 80s.
Right.
Let me mention this too, because there's a lot of debating, and some scholars say, oh no, the resolutions didn't read that. Rhode Island didn't send any delegates to the convention. And they wrote, their delegates, or their governor I think it was, they wrote a letter to the convention. And they said, no matter what comes out of this convention, we still have to agree with it, because under the Articles of Confederation was the last, Article 13, which was the last article, it said that the several states have to agree, which means all the states. Mm-hmm. And so what did they do? Well, they changed the mode of ratification from majority, from everybody to 9 or 3/4 or 2/3, I believe. So from 13 to 9. So it was a big difference.
Yes.
And there's another issue too. The delegates. You mentioned earlier, who will they be? Now, as I said, if all the delegates share the same worldview we share, we'd probably get down there and say, yeah, let's repeal the 16th and 17th and just call it a day. It lasts 10 minutes, Right. But there are a lot of people that don't share a constitutional Christian, Judeo-Christian worldview. They despise limited government. You saw when President Trump gave a State of the Nation address, and you saw people that should be a little excited when things are good for America. They are upset that he said America first. And whether you like Trump or not isn't the issue. Is, America first is what the president, it's what you're supposed to, but a lot of people in this country don't like the idea of America first. There are a lot of people in this country that say the Constitution is anachronism. The Nation magazine had a feature story saying, yeah, it's an ugly old thing and something like that, and it should be changed and abolished. And those folks will be at this convention.
Right.
And they'll say, well, there won't be any, we can guarantee there won't be any crazy amendments coming out of this because if there are, it still takes 3/4 of the states or ratifying convention. They don't like to mention the ratifying conventions if necessary. Well, what's crazy? That's a subjective term. There are some things that sound awfully sane to me, but to repeal the 16th Amendment, you go to the typical progressive on the street, I hate the word, I think retrogressive is more, and they would think you're utterly insane. How are we going to survive if we don't tax everybody to death, you see?
Exactly.
So that's the problem. The delegates will not reflect. In my opinion, there'll be less than 5% of the delegates at this convention that will share the views of our founders. That's maybe a little more, but not a whole lot more.
Which is something that we've experienced on the public forum.
Correct.
Many times over, where you're invited to have your opinion, but oftentimes the panel is made up of those who, it's not necessarily equal terms.
That's right.
It's very unfair, and so then the whole idea is, it's called the Delphi Technique, by the way.
Oh yes, I'm familiar with that, yeah.
And what results is that you have now sat on this panel, you now have come to a group decision, you've lost, your side is lost, and so now you feel like, well, I've had my say, it's been a democratic process, and you lose. But the principles are not carried forward, which is the major problem. We have a constitution, which is something that I keep harping on, that has been very well founded. And if you go back to Black's Law Dictionary, you go back to the Magna Carta and many of the different
Organic
documents
Yeah.
that our founding fathers used to come up with all of this, it's very strong. And who was it that said this is a document that is written for a moral and
John Adams said that.
Yeah,
He said it's written for a religious and moral people. It is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other.
right.
And that's really the problem. We don't have a paper problem. We have a people problem.
Exactly. And
Because we don't have the moral compass, we don't have the people that stick to all those basics that the founding fathers set forth, that made this a great country. It's been eroded, and that's what's going on. Is slowly this erosion has gone on, where the family is no longer first and foremost. God is not first and foremost. The family is not second. Our country is not third. They've slowly chipped away at it and made it okay by attacking us people personally. So you've slowly been demoralized. You've slowly been attacked. You've slowly been assaulted, to the point where if you even open your mouth, and you can see it on something as simple as Facebook, and we can all roll our eyes, but this is where a lot of people get the information. This is where they're actually able to share ideas and conversations with like-minded people. Sometimes we wander onto the other pages just because we're willing to hear the other side. We want to make sure that we've got everything, we're hearing both sides and we're truly making a judgment. But the whole time, the Constitution and like you said, all these these founding fathers, these papers have been put, I don't want to say on a pedestal, but they've been almost locked away as though they're just so old, like grandma. They're so old, and of no consequence, and have no
Anachronism, that's what some people call it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right.
And so they've eroded it away, and now people don't realize, and Karen and I have had this discussion, just to say, Lynn, remember the Constitution. And sometimes that I am, there's an issue out there right now, and it's near and dear to my heart, and so I get emotionally engaged in it, and Karen and some of my friends have to go, Lynn, go back, think about the Constitution, and I do, but you lose it a little bit, and you have to get pushed back to it, because the Constitution clearly says, blah, blah, blah.
Not a role of the federal government.
Correct,
Yeah.
and the other thing is that, the problem is the people, not the people as in, but people, and how they keep changing everything and chipping away at it, and interpretations.
people in the agencies and in the political.
And they're not being held
You know what
accountable
would be
to
a fun
follow the law.
project to do if
What?
you could do a streetside remote? and just on any given day, just ask people come by, what are the first 10 amendments referred to? Basic questions like that.
Mhm.
I would guarantee that 90% of the people that walk by here, many of them with college degrees, probably more than half, wouldn't know.
Right.
And we do information tables at Camp Constitution, at homeschool shows, at gun shows, at county fairs, at Cheshire Fair, what have you. And it doesn't matter. Now, homeschoolers tend to be a little better,
Mhm.
but not, overwhelmingly. But now you're always going to find some people who max that little quiz we have, right?
Right.
But for the most part, people, you ask them how many amendments, they look at you like they guess, they don't know. Well, that's pretty important. I mean, if you
Well,
you know.
for example, one of the things when a young man that I know who was assigned to the ROTC program to oversee the ROTC in the region, Reserve Officer Training Corps, which is something that occurs in high schools and colleges to prepare our young people to do military service if that's their inclination. And this gentleman was assigned to be the regional oversight. And he got to UNH and he started looking at the curriculum for the ROTC program. And he said, "Where's the Constitution class?"
That's right.
And he said, "Wait a minute. These are young people who are going to, when they graduate from high school and they've got this on their what is it called? Their transcript. They're going to be holding their hand up and swearing
right.
to support and defend the Constitution, and they've never had a class in understanding what it says."
Well,
I mean, it may have been back in high school, but it's not at college. So he reintroduced it
That's
into the
wonderful.
curriculum.
That's wonderful.
Well, the other place is any of our wonderful military people. They go into their military training, Paris Island and all the different places, as my son did, and the Constitution is pounded into their head, and they know it inside
good.
out and backwards, which
That's
is the
good.
way it should be. And so the strange thing is, so again, we have a lot of military in our family and friends, so they come back and they run into incidents, and with some of our police officers and some of the attorneys and stuff, and they do not know the Constitution inside out and backwards the way our military people do. And we need to make sure our police officers are getting a total education on the Constitution so that we have our military, our police, and even our lawyers, they can talk about them as it pertains to a case, but
case law, yeah.
right, but in everyday life, they don't. And so we need to bring this up and make this first and foremost. This is what everything's decided on, not how you feel or how you identify today.
We're going to have a nice announcement. We're going to be partnering with one of the largest public schools in the state.
In New Hampshire or
New Hampshire,
In
to
New
provide
Hampshire,
to
okay.
provide constitutions.
Nice.
Awesome.
And I've got 1,000 sitting in a box ready to roll. So
Right.
I don't want to mention anything until I guess we officially
Yep.
You officially get it done?
It's going to be
Well,
fun though.
it's interesting too, because Lou D'Alessandro, Senator Lou D'Alessandro from Manchester, actually last year, because he was a civics teacher in high schools in New Hampshire before he became a senator, and he said, they're not learning the Constitution any longer. They're not learning government any longer. So he actually introduced a bill to teach government. Well, to teach civics, and it passed the legislature. So I have another friend who's a state legislator, Mike Moffett, also a retired Marine, who said, wait a minute, he's introduced a bill that requires that you pass a certain academic test on civics before you graduate. And I said, but Senator D'Alessandro already took care of this. And he said, no, he introduced that the class must be presented. He didn't introduce that the standard must be met.
I see.
So it's very interesting that our policymakers are starting to recognize that we need to make sure that our people understand this Constitution.
Well, it's interesting. I have an my 8th grade history teacher taught us the Constitution.
Right, mine
Memorized
too.
dates. My last spitball I ever threw was in her class because I was a surprise student, and when she found out, she just said, Harold, I'm surprised at you, and that was it. I don't know if she was a liberal or conservative. She probably was a liberal, but she had a great love of the Constitution. And we left there. We had a good understanding of it at the 8th grade. So when I took my oath to defend the when I went in the U.S. Army, I had I may not have memorized every single amendment, but I had a pretty good knowledge that this was a pretty good thing that we should probably keep. And my opinion is that oath I took when I was 17 stays with me till I die.
Right.
That's funny you should say that, because my son is the same way, and all his friends, that when you, because you never retire, but when you leave the military and go into civilian life, every single one of them say, bar none, at no point did I retract that oath.
That oath.
So till the day they die, and they believe it, and these are kids that are in their 20s, right now, today,
Right.
that oath,
Well,
they hold it near and dear to their heart,
That's right.
and they won't give it up. And so when someone challenges them, and somebody somebody says to them,
hello.
you know, blah 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 blah,
This
you're
is
an
WSMN.
ex-Marine or you're ex-Army, they go, no, and I never gave up my oath. So when we get people that are questioning them and pushing back, and there's like, they say, no, till the day I die, and I will defend this country, and I will defend the Constitution with everything I have.
Well, that's one of the things that's pounded into our military too, is integrity is important. Your word is important. When you're out on the battlefield and you're in the middle of combat and somebody needs to rely on you, they don't need to be questioning whether or not your word
That's
to
right.
have their
That's right.
back is going to be there. So it is extremely important, and they are the ones who do say, you know, my word is my bond, and it's as good as a handshake as far as they're concerned. So
Absolutely.
We also have a state constitutions too,
Right.
which New Hampshire is one of the oldest. Not the, would have been the oldest, but they revised it, I think, in the 1780s. Dan Hitzer would be more on top of that.
Right.
The oldest constitution in the world that's still being used is the Massachusetts Constitution, although it's been amended umpteen times.
Right.
So that's an important too. And realizing that James Madison said that the U.S. Constitution, he said, gave, I'm trying to remember verbatim, but he said that the powers to the central or federal government were few and defined.
Yes.
Everything else was left to the states, and people knew that. So the idea that you could amend the Constitution to make things more specific is ridiculous.
Right.
You know, they talk about a parental rights amendment. Well, we have it. It's called the 10th Amendment.
Exactly.
The federal government has no business dealing with parents and families. Well, they passed the Mondale Act in the 1970s, and they fund all of the state-run child agencies. That's not their role. They've got their hand in education under the Department of Education. That's totally unconstitutional. So when people say, "What do you think about Betsy DeVoe?" and I said, "Well, she may be better than anyone Hillary would have chosen,
Exactly.
but the office should be abolished." And they, "Oh my goodness, why would you do that? Who would teach anything?" Well, the federal government's not supposed to do that. In fact, I have a book that was published in 1941 by the U.S. government. It's called The Formation of the Union Under the Constitution. I found it in the library for $1, you know, in the library book sales. It's a precious thing. In fact, it was selling on Amazon for about $3, and then when I started talking about it and people were buying, next thing you know, it's $70 now. That's how you create a demand and put it back in print. But they had a little catechism on the Constitution of questions and answers. And one of the questions was, what role does the federal government have in education?
None.
And the answer was none. But this is a New Deal administration. This was Franklin Roosevelt who signed off on this thing. They knew it back then. But you ask the average Republican, they really, oh yeah, we'll abolish it. But they haven't abolished it.
Right. And it's interesting because when Franklin Roosevelt signed it in, it was health, education, and welfare.
That's
He
right.
sort of snuck it in there, and now there's separate agencies, unconstitutional agencies, and that's what I keep saying. If you want to balance the budget, you close all of the agencies that do not deal with the military, that do not deal with commerce, and that do not deal with our infrastructure. And then, hey, guess what? We've reduced the whole budget.
By about 80%.
Exactly.
You see, there's one of the reasons why people are advocating Article 5 convention is because they want to have a balanced budget amendment. And that sounds really good. What fiscal conservative would be against such a thing?
Right.
However.
Well, how do you balance the budget? Actually, the budget is balanced when you print more money or you borrow more money, and then all of a sudden, okay, we have a lot of debt, but it's like a household budget, you know. Hey, I can't afford that second vehicle, so I either sell a car or get a second job,
Right.
or max out my credit cards. But every month it's balanced. But I can't make money on my own. Unlike the federal government, they can just tell the print up, make some notes and then sell them to the Fed, and bingo, they get monetized the debt. We can't do that. So a balanced budget amendment can be passed, but you may not have a sound budget or a constitutional budget. You've got to cut these unconstitutional programs. So don't talk to me about a balanced budget. Talk to me about a constitutional budget.
Correct.
Another thing
And
too.
that's an interesting swing on that. We're talking with Hal Shurtleff of campconstitution.net.
That's right.
And Hal is here talking to us about the Article 5 Constitutional Convention and Conservative Chic Chat with Lynn and Karen on WSMN 1590, Nashua source for news and talk. And if you want to join our conversation or have a question for Hal, it's 603-816-1590. I sort of stumbled upon that one.
It's interesting, that whole budget, subject, and here we are rolling up on March, and they have not passed a budget again, and we're rolling up on this, and it just is mind-boggling to me that we the people we have to do budgets every single week, every single month in our households. And we have to give up things in order to pay certain bills, and you have to move around your expenses and to make things happen. If you don't have enough for groceries, well then don't eat out for the week. And if you don't, and we're asking the government to balance the budget, and as you say, in a constitutional way. And the number one way, let's name a couple of them, is take education away from the federal government and let the states take care of it. So our state tax money takes care of our education. Another one, and I for the past year and a half that I've been doing this, I have my laundry list of millions and billions of dollars that are used, which is voted on by our senators and our congressmen, who decide what to do with our tax money without asking us. And that's another problem, where they spend millions and billions on all these studies of crocodiles on treadmills. And we all laugh and giggle, but when you add it all up, you are talking trillions that, quite frankly, should be going to our seniors, to our military, to our single moms, and helping people out, not taking care of them for life, helping them out, getting them over the bump.
Well, not even
and our
that.
infrastructure.
No, I'm going to back you up on that.
You're going to back me up?
I am.
Here we go.
Well, we're
Backtrack
talking
a
about
little
the state
bit.
level, that's not the federal government job.
If she's talking about federal level.
No, I'm talking state level.
Oh,
So
you're
take
talking-
these things, they take these away from the federal government
I
and put them
see.
back with the state.
Okay.
So if we start taking those away, but those are the things that the federal government have been handing our money out
But
to.
I'll
But
also back you up a little
Okay.
bit anyway, because one of the things.
she's gonna
I love it.
keep me honest, and it's good because you know what,
It's
it
a
makes
discussion, right.
It's a discussion, and it's things that that
We have to think about and talk
Well, we
about.
do.
So one of the things is that, first of all, it's not government's money to give away to welfare or to nonprofit organizations or to any sorts of issues that you want to bring up there. There's a lot of organizations out there, non-governmental organizations, of which, by the way, the Federal Reserve, who prints our money, is not a government organization. It is a private organization.
Private corporation.
And so, but one of my big things is, yes, the Visiting Nursing Association does a wonderful job in every one of our communities, but it's not our town responsibility to pay for that, to give them that money. That's up to me as an individual to realize the good that they're doing in our community and willingly give forth that money.
So just
not using my tax dollars,
Right.
but my willingly giving that money to charities that I choose to give to.
correct. So as you give to St. Jude's, you should have the opportunity
Or
to
if
give
I
to
want-
the visiting nurses. So
Right.
it should be along those same lines of your charitable donations.
Right, or if I wanted to give to Planned Parenthood, which I will never do,
Right.
but
But again,
if I
it should
wanted
be
to
you
do it,
choosing.
it should be up to me, not the government of New Hampshire going through the executive council designating my tax dollar to go to these organizations.
Correct.
Some
That's
of
right.
which I don't agree with ideologically.
Yep.
So that's where I was backing you up on the welfare, taking care of.
No, and I
those.
agree with you, but I just think if we
But-
got rid of all those, how low would our budget go? So I got a question for you.
Your trickle-down economics, just to follow on,
Yeah.
for example, would be if we got rid of the Federal Department of Education, the state of New Hampshire would have to get rid of 75% of their employees in the Department of Education because they are the recipient of federal dollars.
Well, that's one of the things too about the balanced budget amendment, is that federal government does pick up a big chunk of the state's budget all over the country, in some cases more than others. I'm not sure if it's 30% New Hampshire or maybe more. In the state of Montana, where Robert Brown, who was here last year, 70%, only because you have these it's a huge state with a small population, a lot of roads that the federal government maintains.
Right.
So 70%. So if you had a balanced budget, then have to say, if it truly worked out as they say it will work out, they'll say, well, sorry Montana, we can't give you that money anymore. Sorry New Hampshire, sorry Massachusetts. So a legislator in New Hampshire can look like a real fiscal conservative. They'll say, well, gee, I want a balanced budget, and I supported that resolution for an Article 5, but darn it, it didn't go through. But I tried. Meanwhile, he or she is voting for all this federal money to come in, or letting it happen, and not cutting out the state agencies.
Right. Exactly. So your question.
So my question, okay, so I'm going to ask the one that actually one of my friends asked in it, and I didn't have the answer to. So when we're talking about constitutionally what the government should and shouldn't pay for, does the money that goes to the UN, NATO, and for foreign aid, does that follow? Where does that fall?
That's unconstitutional as well. Absolutely unconstitutional.
So
We should get out of the UN.
Right.
We should get out of NATO. NATO is really a UN subdivision
Right.
that may have been justified. It was sold to us right after World War II as some an anti-communist entity, but it really never was. It was always a building block. And I served in NATO, and I learned the hard way. I was just a teenage boy, but I learned the hard way what NATO really is. And it shouldn't even exist today. With the European Union, we should have no military presence in Europe whatsoever. And maybe the Navy, obviously sea lanes and all that, but other than that, we have no business having ground soldiers in Europe. And we've been there. World War II never really came to an end because we're still over there.
Exactly. Actually, World War I never came to an end.
Yeah.
So
If you go all the way back.
So would the same be for foreign aid? Because they always, you know how they always
Absolutely.
list these things separately, so, we need
Well,
to clarify these things to everybody.
Where does this strategic presence, because we are the largest country in the world, and we are also the most profitable, et cetera, et cetera. We are the big person in the room. How do we now protect our interests and the interests of our allies?
Well, we're not supposed
or
to.
should we be?
Right. We're not supposed to protect. I think it was John Quincy Adams, who was the author of the Monroe Doctrine.
Right.
He said, "We are for everywhere the lovers of the friends of liberty, protectors only of our own."
Okay.
And George Washington, in his farewell address, he said, "Have nothing to do with permanent foreign entanglements." And
Right.
we have stopped. We stopped listening to that advice during the Spanish-American War in 1898, and we become an empire, an imperialistic empire. Now I sound like a lefty, right?
Yeah.
But they're true to that extent. That's right. And by the way, if you say get us out of the UN, the average person on the left would be angry about that. So
Very angry.
Oh,
Yeah.
very, very much so.
I think we should be out of there, and I don't think that they should have an office in our country.
That's right.
They
That's
should-
right.
and-
Because it's considered sovereign territory.
Correct.
No, Donald Trump did a good thing when he said no more aid to Pakistan. And he said we won't give any aid to countries that vote against us as the UN. That's halfway.
Yeah.
That's a lot better than we would have got from Hillary, because she'd probably get, well, the more you hate us, the more money we'll give you, right?
Yes, yeah.
And the more you like us, the more we'll treat you like an enemy. That's been our policy for like 100 years, or at least 50 years, right?
Well, the reality is too, as you said, this started at the Spanish-American War, where we started deviating from the wisdom
That's right.
of the founding fathers. So it's been a gradual occurrence that makes up where we are right now. So we really need to realize that the steps that Donald Trump took in the UN, saying to each of those nations, you are responsible. I expect each one of you to fight for your own country, to
right.
put your own country
First,
first,
that's right.
in your policy,
Just as we are.
just as I am. But also realize that if you're not going to work with me, I'm not funding you. I'm not helping you in
That's
any
right.
way, and that is a good first step in the
That's
right
right.
direction.
That's
So
right.
we just need to have more education of our populace so that we can now support him further.
And that's really, see, the founding fathers, what's the solution to these problems we have? First off, it's a moral problem. James Madison said the disquietude of the people. That means when they're really riled up. Because you can have all the amendments you want, but if the people who are sent to Congress or sent to Concord or what have you don't share that perspective, it doesn't matter what the Constitution reads.
Exactly.
For the most part. Yes,
Exactly, yeah.
we will have every election every 2 years. We'll have a presidential election. We'll obey the Constitution when it comes to the mechanical things. And the income tax, I'm sure they'll always obey that amendment, right? Or they can raise taxes and borrow money. They have no trouble with that. It's what they do in addition to what the Constitution gives. That's really the problem. So getting back to the Article 5, here in New Hampshire, there's 3 resolutions. One of them, there might be a couple more. There was one that dealt with a wayward delegate bill, which we have time to discuss. The one I testified against a couple of days ago was the one by the Convention of States, which is really calling for a pretty much an open convention, which is what a convention is anyway. They talk about things to restrain the federal government. The Constitution is supposed to do that. So the one that was last week was dealing with a group called Wolfpack. That's Cenk Uygur's group. That's a left-wing version. And by the way, there are people on both sides of the spectrum. You know, you talk about Facebook and getting nasty on Facebook. You know, people who support the Article 5 on the conservative side will say, "Oh, you're in George Soros' camp," and we'll say, "No, you're in George Soros." But nothing is solved because you do have people on both sides that both support and oppose an Article 5 convention. And you know, I can throw out names of people who support one and names that oppose it. That in itself doesn't make it right or wrong. That's really a fallacy of, it's a Latin term, argumentum populis or something like that.
Right.
Popula, I mean, just because a lot of people think it's a good idea doesn't mean it's a good idea.
Which is why
Yeah.
we're a republic and
That's
not a
right.
democracy.
And
right?
this is why you need 2/3 to get it through anyway. So we're safe as long as we meet that 2/3 there. New Hampshire has one application that was passed in 2010 calling for an Article 5 or applying for an Article 5 balanced budget amendment. Like I said earlier, it doesn't matter what the purpose is, it's the fact that the convention is being applied for is the issue. All the other ones were repealed, and that was mainly due to the work of Bill McNally. My good friend Bill McNally used to have a show on the station
Right.
over the years, and the late Al Tollmeyer, who was from Nashua. He was another defender. He passed away about 7 or 8 years ago, and he was in his 90s. But there's been a number of resolutions since 2011, and thankfully all of these have been voted down. And we hope that will happen here in the committee, or at least in the House. Usually they've been tabling them. One of them, both Wolfpack and Convention of States made it through the Senate, through the committees in the House, but they were tabled at the which is their prerogative of the
Right.
legislators.
Yeah, right.
That's how things work. Right now, there are 28 applications for an Article 5 convention
in the United
in
States.
the United States
Okay.
that deal with a balanced budget. The thing about this is that many of these are very old, so Congress may or may not recognize them. About 4 states rescinded their Article 5 conventions applications in the last couple of years. Maryland, Delaware, Nevada, and there's a 4th state. I can't remember what the 4th state was. But we have to act like we're 6 states away. And now there's other groups, like this group called Convention of States I mentioned earlier. They have, I think, 12 states that have passed these applications, and they've got about 20 or so pending. And the other day they had the former Senator Tom Colburn from Oklahoma there. And he's a very likable guy. I got to hand it to him.
Yeah.
He's very likable. Unlike some of their, like Mike Farris, who wasn't very likable, Mark Meckler, who's easy not to like, he's a very likable guy. And he testified, of course, when he was in Congress as a senator, he supported the Bush bailout. Now, I testified before he did, so I didn't get a chance to sort of mention that. And I brought it up. Now, he makes reference to this annotated Constitution, which is the one that we really follow. And he means all the Supreme Court decisions and all of the opinions on what Article 1 means, what Article 2. He said it's 2,000 pages long. I said to him, and I was trying to be a wise guy, but he needs to be challenged. I said, what Constitution did you look at when you voted for the Bush bailout? I guess the TARP, Troubled Assets, or whatever it's called. He did admit he was wrong for that vote. But see, here's a guy like that, this honorable guy, voted the wrong way, along with a lot of his colleagues, and they knew better. He even defended it too. He said the ATM machines would go dry. That's not a conservative mindset. So if you can't trust the guy when he's sitting as a senator, he could have just voted no. How are you going to trust delegates when they come to a convention and they're pressured, and lobbyists or what have you? So yeah, I think that we should bolt the door. And they'll use this term like, oh, you're afraid, or you're a coward, you're afraid. And I said, well, how many people in this room locked their doors or their cars before they came in here? Everybody did, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Are you cowards because you lock your door? No, because someone might come in and steal it, right?
Well,
and that's why we want to lock the door to a convention. They might steal this Constitution.
Yeah.
It's common sense, and it makes sense. So we've been talking with Hal Shurtleff from campconstitution.net on the Article 5 applications that are going through the New Hampshire State Legislature on WSMN 1590 with Conservative Chic Chat and Lynn and Karen. So, Hal, you said there was another one called what was it? The Wayward
Yes, Wayward Delegate Bill.
Delegate.
Now, the supporters of an Article 5 convention, left and right, when I hear them testify, they'll say there's no way a convention can, exceed its mandate, or a runaway convention. It's not going to happen. That's crazy. That's a conspiracy theory. They love that term, when it fits their needs. And then they come up with this Wayward Delegate Bill. Well, wait a minute. Now, let's back up. You said you had nothing to worry about, so why are you worried about Wayward Delegates? You say it won't happen. Now you say it might happen, right? So, and now let's look at this Wayward Delegate Bill. Now, you pass a bill in New Hampshire, it becomes law to make it illegal to do certain things, right? So, the convention's held, let's say it's held in Philadelphia, or Arizona, or maybe Washington, D.C. How are you going to enforce a law when the crime was committed outside the state? When the delegates, they may be appointed by the state, or even elected, that may happen, but they're doing a federal function. What if they're down in this convention and they are given immunity from prosecution? Or what if they vote in secret? The idea that to be C-SPAN will be there and you'll have your sound, a remote there, probably isn't going to happen. The first convention we had under the articles, the windows were all covered up, and they even put sawdust or sand in the streets so they couldn't hear the carrier. They didn't want anybody to know what was going on until they were ready to finish it. So we have no idea it would be what would be broadcast around the world. We don't know.
Okay.
So, can you imagine state police going down to Philadelphia and say, Delegate Jones, you're under arrest? It's ludicrous, but it's a way to mollify. Okay, now you have nothing to worry about. But only, I think, a couple of states have passed these. So you have to have every state to do it.
It's so funny because a very familiar legislator that I know often says that why they introduce close to 1,000 bills every session means that there were so many laws that they passed, or so many bills that they passed, that they now must go back and try and figure out how to make it right.
Yeah.
Because they messed up.
I really have to admire these legislators to sit through these hearings day in and day out. There are some issues that are near and dear to me that I would really, this is great stuff. But to sit there and listen to people, and a lot of these good people will testify and they'll discuss nothing to do with the issue.
Right.
I'm here because my great-grandfather did this, and that's all well and good. What's got to do? And a lot of these, depending on the chairman of the committee and where they stand, you know, they'll give that person a lot of time, well, but we don't like this, you know. But to sit through the day in and day out, that's tough.
Yeah.
You know.
And it is, a lot of our chairmen will try very diligently to set a time limit
Yeah.
and then live by that time limit. But then there are those, as you say, because we are in a political world where power governs many, many things, where it's not as
And that's
much-
another issue too. James Madison, now the convention was over. New Hampshire was the state, I think was February of, or March of 1788. It was the 9th state, the U.S. Constitution, now the law of the land. They haven't actually sat yet. Congress hasn't been sworn in, but this is the new Constitution. 2 states had applied for an Article 5 conventions, New York State and I think it was New York and Virginia. And James Madison, known as the father of the Constitution, mainly because he took notes at the convention, he wrote a letter to a friend of his, George Tuberville, which you can find online. And in so many words, he said that I would shudder at the thought of another one because of the climate, the political climate. Then, imagine what it is today.
Oh, yeah.
No,
So
I
far
can't.
different.
I don't want
And
to
so
imagine.
many, yeah. So
I mean, you just look at when I mentioned Trump's State of the Union address, and look at all the division right in that room there, right at
the division that we see every day.
everywhere.
Every time I get an email from a Senator Shaheen or Congresswoman Custer, it's always what can we do to stand in the way.
That's right.
It's not what can we do because we've got an American problem here and we need to solve it.
Now,
It's what can we do to stand in the way.
There's another, the Electoral College, which is what our founders gave us to choose the president. I think it was brilliant. It made it states with small populations had a certain amount of votes. If we got rid of that, we would be run by Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York City.
Correct.
That would
Exactly,
Yep.
exactly,
The
yes.
presidents would just campaign. You would never see a president
Well,
candidate
California
here.
would have decided our last presidential election.
That's right. And so I think it was a very good thing, but there are people that want to get rid of that.
Yes.
Right, they want to
And
know
if
the
they get rid of, what's the best way to get rid of that? Well, one of the best ways is through an Article 5 convention. And if you think it can't happen, then why are there so much? There's a lot of money in it. This is a big money thing too. But when you see big money, it's not always supporting liberty and limited government. And you know, people will say Soros, but you get Koch money, and well, the Kochs are conservative. Well, to a point, they're open borders. They like open borders. That's not
No.
constitutionalist, right?
And
So-
they're not necessarily there on all of the social issues. So,
at the very, yeah, exactly right, yeah.
So, you know, we've been talking with Hal Shurtleff of campconstitution.net on WSMN 1590, Nashua Source for News and Talk. And Hal, we've only got a few minutes, or a few seconds left, actually. So, what's...
A whole
what would
hour's
you-
gone by already?
Oh, yes.
Oh my goodness, I
Yeah,
thought we
you have to
didn't
come
take our
back.
first break.
Yeah.
Well,
So let us know what it is, your last
well,
parting
first
words
off,
for our...
if you're interested in helping out us on this issue, give us a call, go to our website, look into our summer camp, visit us on YouTube or on our Facebook page, campconstitution.net. So thank you for having me.
Thank you, Hal.
And this has been Lynn and Karen on Conservative Chic Chat on WSMN 1590, Nashua Source for News and Talk. And we hope you have a great weekend.
See you Monday.
These mics are super sensitive. You went like that and you
Oh,
can
I
hear it.
know. Well, I was writing and it was going...